And we're talking about, for the last time today, these people that make up what's called the Hall of Faith. All through the preceding 10 chapters of Hebrews, which we went through beginning way back in the month of June, we saw that the writer was trying to connect to this audience, and in a larger sense to you and me, to say the times we're living in are indeed difficult. They are indeed challenging. They are indeed strenuous times. But don't give up upon your faith in God. The people who were hearing this message were being challenged on every side because of their Jewish heritage, but their faith in Jesus Christ. And they had been rejected from their society, no longer allowed to permit to associate with other Jewish people. They weren't allowed to go to worship. They weren't allowed to be in the community. Some of them were losing their jobs. Some of them, indeed, were losing their homes. And some of them were being persecuted almost to the point of death. And he writes to them and says, look at these 16 people in the past. Normal, average human beings like you and me, all imperfect, fallible people, but who chose to exercise faith in extraordinary times. And the writer says, I've given you their stories to remind you and me that we have the same choice and the same opportunity today to choose to exercise faith in our own extraordinarily difficult and challenging situations in which we are living. And in these last two verses of chapter 11, I want to talk to you this morning about heroes. Because what he really says is these peoples that we have mentioned here, they are truly and in reality heroes of faith. They are heroes in a spiritual sense, even if they don't necessarily look like what heroes might look like. Now I've got to make a point of confession to you right now about last Sunday. Hebrews is a deep book. We call it Deeper Water. And last week, it was a very, very deep theological concept because it was about all these people who never had anything really come out the way they hoped it would, though they lived in faith. All of them basically died without seeing very much of what they wanted to have happen. And in trying to communicate that to you guys, I felt like we succeeded theologically, but when I went back and looked at that, I think I might have failed experientially. And I say that because if someone who's been doing this for a long time, I'll give you a little secret about communicators. Good communicators have three eyes going on all the time. Now, nobody will teach you this. Nobody will tell you this. I never heard it. I just realized it. Some communicators only have one eye. The one eye is just focusing on what they're saying right now. Better communicators have two eyes. They look at what they're saying right now, but they're able to think about it at the same time what they're about to say. But the really good ones, and I'm not saying I'm a great one, but I've done this long enough, is that you have a third eye. A third eye. The first eye, what are you saying? The second eye, what are you about to say? But the third eye, how's it being received by the audience? And I got to tell you, last week I think I failed because for the first time in a while I noticed some of you were catching a nap. And I don't blame you for that. I blame me for that. Because in trying to go so deep with you, I don't think that I made it as relevant. When we come together, we're always trying to be authentic and relevant. We were authentic, but not necessarily relevant. Somebody said, good preaching always does three things. It makes you laugh, it makes you cry, and it makes you think. I hopefully made you think. I don't know if I made you cry, and I don't think I made you laugh enough last week. So, in light of that, today's message is brought to you by John Meyer Carpet Cleaning. And I asked John, tell me something that you think is funny right now, and I'll share it with the audience this morning. And John told me that these are tough times we're living in. That in the old days we had Bob Hope, Johnny Cash, and Steve Jobs. And today we have no hope, no faith, and no jobs. Brought to you by John Meyer Carpet Cleaning. So when you see John this week, tell him that I used it, and you tell him I said that he promised to make a sizable donation to the Journey Church for that plug right there, okay? So I want to try to make this a little more relevant to you today about heroes, because heroes, truthfully, are not easy to find today, are they? There's a lot of maybe disappointment about what a hero is, and maybe some confusion. I've seen some movies recently. One of the movies I saw was Django. And I'm not necessarily saying that was a good thing I went, but I was taken by a member of our church, so I think it's okay. I'm off the hook. It's a great movie if you like Quentin Tarantino movies. If you don't like Tarantino movies, you may not like Django. But Jamie Lee Fox is pretty amazing. But it says a lot about our culture that maybe the signature line is when he gets recruited to be a bounty hunter, that Jamie Lee Fox says, let me get this straight. I get to kill people, and you're going to pay me money to do it. And that's really the heart of the movie, about revenge and getting even and killing pretty much bad people all through the movie. And in a sense, it says a lot about culture today that's the sort of thing that an audience would cheer about. And then I saw another great film called Zero Dark 30. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's a story about the hunt for bin Laden. And this one maybe is a little more reflective of what we would like to think a hero is, because we see about all the things out front on the hunt for bin Laden, but the heroine of this movie is a singular female CIA agent that no one ever heard of and no one's ever met, and to this day remains anonymous, who singly focused for 12 years on finding bin Laden and was convinced when nobody else in the government was that he was in Pakistan in the compound where indeed they find him in that film. Heroes, they're hard to find. Now, when I was growing up, heroes to me were pretty much sports figures. And I liked all sports, but as a kid, I really liked baseball. And I read all the biographies of all the guys who played back in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, and all the people who played for the Brooklyn Dodgers, you know, like the Gil Hodges and the Jackie Robinsons and the Pee Wee Reeses. And then my team growing up with the New York Yankees, who Pasquale really seems to be fond of. And I loved Mickey Mantle, and I loved Roger Maris. And in fact, in about 1965, I got my first wallet. And in my wallet, I had no pictures of my family, but I had the starting lineup of the New York Yankees. I did. Yogi Berra was the catcher. Joe Pepitone at first, Bobby Richardson at second, Cleet Boyer at third, and we had in left field Tommy Tresh, Mickey Mantle, and Roger Maris in right field. Whitey Ford was my pitcher. That was a pretty good lineup. And baseball figures, you know, the press didn't report like it did today. There wasn't any ESPN. There wasn't any Twitter. And there's a lot of things we never found out about people that was probably good. Heroes were people that we thought we could look up to and gave us hope for our lives. But I realized it's been a bad 2 weeks for heroes in the sports world. Would you agree with that? It's been a tough week. Speaking of Major League Baseball, for example, the National League Baseball Hall of Fame is like the greatest and most difficult Hall of Fame of all sports. 527 baseball writers of America vote, and you have to get at least 75% of all the votes to be able to get in. This was the headline on Wednesday of last week in the New York Times, and the inductees are, and the paper was blank. The Boston Globe the same day headline was voters, Hall of Fame Hall voters pitch shutout. For only the fourth time in the history of the Hall of Fame, nobody was considered to be heroic enough to make baseball's Hall of Fame. And yet 10 years ago, if you had asked baseball fans, they would say all of the leading players at the time of the game were surefire first-round inductees, especially these three guys, Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, and Sammy Sosa. Who could forget the career that Barry Bonds had? Nobody has ever won 7 MVP awards, but Barry Bonds did. 14-time an All-Star, 8 Gold Gloves, holds the Major League record for 73 home runs in one season, broke the record for a while that for a long time was Babe Ruth, and then Roger Maris, and then Mark McGuire's, and then was broken in 2001 by Barry Bonds, and he broke Hank Aaron's all-time home run career of 762 home runs. Doesn't even get close to getting in on the ballot this year. How about Roger Clemens? The Rocket, 24 years pitched in the major leagues, 7 times Cy Young Award winner. Nobody ever won 7 times the Cy Young Award, which is the best pitcher in baseball. 11-time All-Star, ERA of 3.62, which if you don't know is very, very good. 4,672 strikeouts, third most ever in the major leagues, and an MVP and the World Series, and he didn't even scratch the ballot of getting in this year. Sammy Sosa. Remember Sammy Sosa? 609 career home runs, 7-time All-Star, NL MVP, only guy in the whole history of Major League Baseball to hit 60 home runs 3 different times. No one's ever done that before. Then there was this guy last year, Mark McGwire. And Mark McGwire was a guy who you may recall broke Roger Maris's record. Perennial All-Star, 2 times World Series champion. In 1998, when he broke Maris's record, Sporting News put out an issue and had the word on it. What's the word? Read it with me. Hero. And yet 2005, he's testifying before Congress and refuses to answer the question, did you or did you not use steroids as a performance enhancement while you were a Major League Baseball player? In 2010, with Bob Costas on the Major League Baseball Network, he broke down in tears and said, the biggest mistake I ever made was I was a steroid user. The steroid era kind of ruined our idea of heroes in baseball, didn't it? Here are 4 guys, McGwire, Bond, Sosa, Clemens, that should have been first-time ballot winners, who were good enough to have gotten in there on their own without ever using any steroids, but they're marked forevermore and will probably never, ever again be considered heroes in our society. And then, not only a bad week for baseball fans, but if you like cycling, Lance Armstrong did something no one ever did. 7 times in a row, 7 consecutive years, won the Tour de France. 1999, 2000, 2001, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Not only that, is known for his heroic defeat of cancer. Came up with the Live Strong bracelet. Anybody ever had a Live Strong bracelet that came out in 2004? Everybody have one of those? Well, you're in good company. 80 million wristbands were sold at $1 each. He had a diagnosis of a testicular cancer in 1996. By the time they found it, it was already in his brains, already in his lungs. Doctor said he had a 40% chance of surviving it. And yet he has this heroic ability to not only take the treatments prescribed up in Indiana University, but to work hard and to train himself and to overcome it. Came to be a huge inspiration to other people who've had cancer. And yet he ends up where you don't want to end up on a Thursday and a Friday night on Oprah, telling the world that I cheated to be a success in cycling. The Anti-Doping Association says about Lance Armstrong that there never was such a systematic and sophisticated cheater as Lance Armstrong. He has been banned for life from every kind of athletic competition in which they test people for drugs. Heroes, where are they? Been a bad week in sports. Manti Te'o. Now here's a guy we can get up behind, right? What a great story. Comes out of Hawaii. Greatest athlete ever, maybe to come. Samoan background. Very committed Latter-day Saints worshiper. Goes to greatest Catholic school in the world. To play football, could have played anywhere in the country. Came out of there with all kind of awards. On December the 6th of this year, at the National Football Awards ceremony, broadcast nationally on television, Manti Te'o did something no one in college football has ever done. He won 6 of the 8 college football awards, including the Greatest Football Player of the Year award, the Maxwell Award. Outstanding young man. Everybody loved his story, especially when the story came out about the day that his grandmother died and then his girlfriend died on the same day, 6 hours later. He told the story on ESPN, told about how they talked every night on the telephone, how they were so much in love, how she said, "Babe, if anything happens to me, you promise you'll stay there, you'll play, you'll honor me throughout the way you play." Just one slight problem with this girlfriend. She never existed. Notre Dame came out with a press conference this week and said Montateo is a victim of a terrible hoax, that he was in love with somebody that never existed and he didn't know it. It was a terrible trick played. And if you listen to sports radio, as I'm prone to do in the car, most people don't believe that story. Whether it's true or not, now people aren't sure if the guy they thought was a hero is, in fact, the hero. His draft status with the NFL may have fallen greatly. I heard one NFL general manager say this week anonymously, "We'll draft a criminal, but we're never going to draft a liar." Heroes. Ronald Reagan said, "Heroes may in fact not be braver than anyone else. They're just braver 5 minutes longer." And now maybe we're getting to what a real hero is. Now, Mark Twain took the cynical approach about heroes. Here's what Mark Twain said: "We find not much in ourselves to admire. We're always privately wanting to be like somebody else. If everybody was satisfied with themselves, there would be no heroes." Interesting perspective, isn't it? We need heroes because we know ourselves we're not heroic. Brody Ashton said, though, heroes are made by the paths they choose, not by the powers they're graced with. And now we're getting even closer to what the Bible would say a real hero is. Because I want you to hear the last two verses of Hebrews chapter 11, verse 39 and 40. Here's what it says. They, or those, all those people, those 16 names we mentioned, and all those other people that he didn't mention by name we talked about last week, those were all commended for their faith. Now, read this with me. Yet what? None of them received what had been promised. That's maybe one of the most amazing verses in all the Bible. The people that are in the Hall of Fame, the Hall of Faith, were faithful people, but they never received what they really had been promised. Since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. I tell you, I pondered over that verse all week. What in the world does that verse mean? I prayed over it, I looked at it, I read about it, and it really, really began to come clear to me as we got toward the end of the week. You know what heroes are? Heroes of faith. Heroes in the body of Christ. Heroes who have made the decision to give their lives to the Lord are really people who have developed the ability to hang on for the big picture. I want you to think about your challenge that you're going through today. I want you to think about the faith conquest that you're trying to achieve. I want you to think about that thing that you want more than anything else for God to do in your life as a result of your belief in Him. Faith is a ability to hang on, not just for today, not just for tomorrow, but for the bigger picture of what God is really up to. We said in the midst of this series at one point, He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. As you look at your faith examination today, I want you to think about the timeline. Is your faith developed and being established for something that you can get and be done with the next day, the next 5 days, the next 5 weeks, the next 5 months? God would say to you today, it is a process of something much bigger that God's working with you about. You see, faith people understand there's no point in hanging on to something tightly and say, well, I'll give everything else to you, God, but this I'm going to keep for myself, because that's something you can't keep anyway. Faith is saying, God, everything I have is yours. Everything that I hold dear, I put into your hands. Everything that I so long and so need in my life, Father, I totally give to you, because I realize that he is no fool who cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. Look at that verse again. Those were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised. They didn't quit. They didn't get angry. They didn't get despondent. They didn't get resentful. They, in fact, discovered that God had planned something even better for them, but it could only be realized with you and me. This is one of the most amazing things about that verse, is that he takes everything that happened in people's lives in the past and he ties it to you and me and the experience we're having together. And I don't think that he was writing that verse to just talk about 2013 and that was the end of it. He says what they were going through connects to what we're going through together, to what God is going to do ultimately in our life. We said in this message series that ultimately the reason you hang on, the reason we don't give up, the reason we don't quit is not so much for what we're going to get right now, but for what is going to be ours when we get to heaven. In the meantime, while we wait, the Bible says God gives us every good thing that we need for now. Whatever happens to you, whether your faith ends up being splendidly wonderful or confusingly, temporarily unfulfilled, don't give up and quit. That's the whole story of this book. Heroes are not people who hit 73 home runs. They're not necessarily people who win 7 Tour de France's. They're not people that are the greatest people in the college football landscape. Heroes are people of faith that you never see, you never know, you never understand who they are. You don't unpack their stories, but they are people who God knows, who have said, come hell or high water, I'm not going to stop following the Lord. I trust him today, I'll trust him tomorrow, I'll trust him forever. And with Job I can say, the Lord gives and the Lord takes it away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. I think it's kind of like getting married. Marriage is sometimes wonderful and sometimes not so wonderful. But when you find your mate, at least that's one problem that you can check off your box. I'm not out there trying to find somebody to be married to. I found my mate. I'm committed. Sometimes it's great, sometimes not so great. But that's an issue that's resolved. That's faith. It's that kind of commitment that we have in Christ that makes us heroic. And you're a hero today in the eyes of God if you haven't quit, if you haven't given up. Some of you just started your journey. Some of you have been on this journey a long time. But the fact that you're here this morning and that you are committed and you aren't quitting makes you a hero, and God is going to bless you for it. Remember Ronald Reagan, heroes may not be braver than anyone else. They're just braver for 5 minutes longer. Not everybody in the Bible is brave. There's a scores of people that, for example, Paul, at the end of his life in 2 Timothy, he gives a laundry list of people who quit for different reasons. Some who love the things of this world more than they love God. Some who got disappointed. Some who turned their back. For all different reasons. Not everybody hangs on in faith. But heroes are people who say, you know what? I get it. I signed up for the full term. And I will trust the Lord. in good times and bad times, in times of plenty and times of want, in times when the sun is shining and in times when it rains, in times when the wind is at my back and the road is before me, and at times when it takes me deep down and around a curve and I can't see what's coming. I have made the decision to be a man, to be a woman of faith. I'll tell you one last story and I'm through. That's a picture of the Colosseum in Rome. Maybe one of the most iconic reminders of antiquity. This is why archaeologists think it looked like in the 1st, 2nd century. And our Catholic friends tell us a great story about a monk by the name of Telemachus. Telemachus was an anonymous monk who had chose a monastic life. That means he had withdrawn from society and had chosen to live a cloistered life where he didn't really interact with the outer world, and he spent all his days in prayer and meditation on God. No one should have ever known of him. No one should have ever heard of him. But one day in his prayer life, Telemachus felt God telling him to do something he had never been asked to do before, and that was to leave the cloister. And not only to leave the cloister, but to get on a boat and go to Rome. He'd never been to Rome. He'd never been in a big city in his life. He had no idea what was there, but the working of the Holy Spirit was so strong in his life that Telemachus got on a boat and he landed in Rome. And when he got off the boat, he could not believe what he found there. He'd never seen more people in his life, and there was this huge buzz in the city. The Romans had just defeated the Goths, and they had declared a 30-day holiday for all the Roman Empire to celebrate this great victory. And he found himself in the streets of Rome, caught up in this huge rush, this huge crowd of people that were pushing him towards somewhere he didn't know, and where he was being pushed towards was the Colosseum. This was in 404 AD. And the Romans had for some time developed a way to keep the public entertained. And the way in which they did that is there in the Colosseum. They put slaves, they put captured warriors, they put degenerate people, they put prisoners on the floor of the Colosseum, and for the entertainment of the masses, they watched people be killed. Sometimes they just turned wild beasts loose on them. But in time, what really entertained them was watching people fight other people to the death. Telemachus found himself horrified that day. You got to remember, this is a guy who has lived a cloistered life, a life of meditation and prayer, who finds himself in the city of Rome, finds himself in a place he didn't know existed, and to his horror he sees these gladiators walk out and raise their swords to Caesar and say, "We who are about to die salute thee." And then the fighting began. And Telemachus can't believe what he's seeing. He absolutely is astonished at it. And he gets up from his seat and he gets on the perimeter of the wall and he begins to say, "In the name of Christ, stop what you're doing." And people just ignore him. And he yells again, "The name of Christ, for the love of Christ, stop what you're doing." Somebody comes up behind him and shoves him off the wall. And now he's on the floor of the arena. And he running around the perimeter. What a comical sight, this guy in a robe with his sandals, who was not an athletic person. And he's putting his arms up in the air and saying, "For the love of Christ, stop what you're doing." And now the people start to notice him, and they think he's some kind of part of the entertainment, and they're laughing at him. He's like a rodeo clown out there. And then Telemachus runs in front of one of the gladiators, and he blocks his vision. And when he does, gladiators almost killed. because he couldn't see the guy swinging the sword. And he takes Telemachus and he knocks him down in the dirt, and now people are laughing, and then all of a sudden there's this buzz, and people realize he's not supposed to be out there, and the chant of the crowd begins to be, kill him, kill him, kill him. And according to those who reported on the events of that day, one of the gladiators takes a sword and he lifts it above the chest of Telemachus, and then he brings it down and spills his blood, and Telemachus dies on the floor of a sandy Colosseum in Rome, a place he'd never been before. And as the story has been told over the ages, when Telemachus dies, the Colosseum grows quiet. Even the gladiators know something has changed, and swords fall down onto the floor, and the audience begins, without any sound, to pick up and one by one walk out the doors of the Colosseum. And we know one thing absolutely for certain historically. From that day forward, there never, ever was a battle of gladiators in the Roman Colosseum. It died that day when Telemachus died. Heroes. They're not what you think they are. Heroes are people who quietly, committedly, devotedly, faithfully, with courage, say, I will keep trusting